Hello and welcome back to Rage Gaming, Diablo 4 and the post-BlizzCon update. This being the new Malignant powers patch, or well, new versions of all powers that we had in Season 1. For us Necromancers, it sees the return of the sacrilegious heart in the form of this ring, the sacrilegious soul. And as you can see, we can now raise skeletons every 1 second, or corpse explosion every 1 second, or even corpse tendril automatically every 8 seconds. This does not even use the cooldown of the effect. This is both better and worse than the original version because it's going to be popping the corpse tendrils slightly less often unless you do get a top roll, but in the positive there's no damage reduction on the corpse explosions now, which is great. So there's a lot of potential for this ring, and I've of course slotted it straight into the insanely strong Bone Spear build. Bone Spear doesn't really need more damage. What it needs, anything that makes casting Bone Spears smoother and better. In this then, you'll have an auto-triggering corpse explosion, so you won't have to press it yourself anymore. The only reason we're running that is not for the damage, but for popping a corpse to get a damage buff. This gives us those damage buffs constantly without having to think about it, which is great. But then we've just got extra corpse tendrils being cast without us using it ourselves every 8 seconds, leaving us with a corpse tendril to use intentionally whenever we need it, like a dangerous pack or something. The cost of running this ring is to lose one offensive aspect that previously in my case slightly improved my damage, but then you get a massive quality of life benefit to make this swap, which is well worth it in my opinion. Much more effective and convenient open world, speed clearing, tier 100 gameplay. In fact, it also means we save on 1 talent point in the skill tree, which is great too. So as you can see, despite this technical one less offensive aspect in the build, I'm still absolutely crushing Uber Lilith, no problem. The damage remains ridiculous, however, now I have my buffs from corpse tendrils and corpse explosions constantly without having to stop to manage those, and so there's actually something to be said about that resulting in more Bone Spear casts, which results in higher DPS. Then we have our tier 100 clears. This just allows me to be much more bold about how fast I'm clearing things in the build, and while the Bone Spear build's damage is massive, you must be smart not to be popped or one shot in a tier 100. This constant corpse tendriling does mean everything is stunned and CC'd more often, which allows me to not only push the damage harder because, you know, we have a specific vampiric power, or say in the Paragon, it also means I'm clearing packs safer because they're stunned every pack. And like I said, if I need to, I've got an off cooldown corpse tendrils to back up there. It's resulted in even smoother tier 100 clears for this build, and of course smoother speed clears and open world content where you don't even have any threat. The ring is like an ultimate years of life update for us, and so we'll want to cram it into every build we can get away with it where we lose a ring slot. Though that's going to be hard in some cases because some builds really don't want to do that. Let's now cover the updates to everything in this build and how it works. From the top then, we have our skill tree, which has slightly changed, but hasn't much, so we're going to blast through it. Your basic attack is Bone Splinters, Enhanced Acolytes for the crit strike chance. We're going for Unliving Energy 3 out of 3 to improve our max essence, also increasing our damage. Imperfectly Balanced 3 out of 3. This improves the core skill, aka Bone Spear, but makes it more expensive. Maxing Bone Spear, of course, enhancing it and going for Paranormal, and Hued Flesh to guarantee that we have corpses during combat, especially against bosses, and how we want more corpses because we have these auto triggers now. On the next level, we do not take Blood Mist. I don't find this is necessary at all in the build. I prefer to run Decrepify, which increases my damage and gives me damage reduction, whereas this hardcore CCs me, and we don't even need, say, Unstoppable effect because we have Metamorphosis Dash. You can see that I don't have 1 point in Corpse Explosion anymore. That is because we have ranks in Corpse Explosion from items. This is guaranteed because you get extra ranks in your corpse skills by wearing the new ring, which means we don't have to put a point into Corpse Explosion to run it. I've got 0 points in it and it's on my bars. We also have 1 point in Grim Harvest, so we can get to 3 out of 3 in Fueled by Death. That's the buff we're getting whenever we pop a corpse. On the next tree, we have Decrepify all the way to Abhorrent, of course for the cooldown resetting. We're cursing targets with Decrepify, so we're going to want 3 out of 3 amplified damage. Death's Embrace gives us a nice damage reduction to close enemies and also improve our damage to them. And then we get to Corpse Tendrils, where I actually only have 1 level in it. We have to put a point in this because we need to get to the enhancement and Plague so we can generate vulnerable with the corpse tendrils, so we can't save a point on that one, sadly, but hey, having the extra levels means the cooldown's better. Then we have our passives for Bone Spear. 3 out of 3 in Serration, Compound Fracture and Evulsion are the important ones. Because I have a spare point in the build now, I'm able to slot that nicely into Rapid Ossification, which means we're reducing our bone skills slightly per every 100 essence we spend, which means we can Bone Storm more often now. On the next tree, on the ultimate, we're taking full into Bone Storm, of course. 3 out of 3 in Inspiring Leader for the attack speed, and then we are sacrificing all our minions, so we take full Standalone and Memento Mori, and then our key passive is still, of course, Ossified Essence. Next we have the Book of the Dead, which are the same as before. Skeletal Skirmishers for the crit strike chance, Skeletal Mages under Cold for the vulnerable damage increase, and then Golems under Iron for the crit strike damage improvements. Next up then we have the Vampiric Powers, where we are running the combo of Prey on the Weak and Meta. Meta is going to give us the unstoppable effect for this build, so every time we dash we get an unstoppable effect, and those we dash through we apply a Vampiric Curse to. Those affected by Vampiric Curse are actually now vulnerable and also take more vulnerable damage in general because of Prey on the Weak, so that's the standard combo. I am still running a Curse Touch as well though, because this allows me to spread Vampiric Curse to enemies without actually dashing through them. In a tier 100 you do not want to be dashing into targets and getting popped because you're up in melee. You want to be playing at medium to long range. So this really helps open world, speed clearing, and of course tier 100. Not fully necessary in single target though, so if you're only doing single target content, you could drop this for a defensive. Now we're picking up Domination, which is going to increase our damage massively to those that are stunned, which is important because we're constantly stunning targets now with Corpse Tendrils. And in fact, with the auto trigger and Corpse Tendrils, we're also staggering bosses more, so we get this damage increase on bosses more often too. Finally, it's still Ravenous for the massive attack speed increase based on our movement speed. Next up, we have our Paragon, which is the same as it was before we had the Malignant change, except I've made some slight point changes, like where they are, what I'm spending on, and we've reached a 70% cap in all of our element resistances because of that, so it's slightly better than it was before. Let's quickly cover it. This is our starter board. I've spent my points, as you can see, and here is still Essence, giving us a massive amount of critical strike damage improvements and increases our critical strike damage to those that are not currently healthy, which is very potent indeed. We get 39 extra dexterity here by spending the points on the board like so. Then we come up to the next board, which is the same as before, Bone Graft. We rotate it so we can get to Bone Graft as fast as possible, also picking up Entomb and making sure to grab the magic nodes that give extra crit strike damage with bone skills. Then we come up through the center and go to the left to pick up Reinvigorate and all the magic nodes there, and to the center for Calcified and all the magic nodes around that. Then we work our way up and to the left to our next glyph, which is still Exploit, giving us extra vulnerable damage, and dealing damage to vulnerable enemies scales our damage by up to 10% times, so it's very potent indeed. We get as much dexterity around this as possible, getting up to 49, and this is how I spend the points to do that. Then we work our way down to the left and come to our third board, which is of course still Scent of Death. The reason this is third instead of fourth is just because of the numbers required to actually get Ruin and other rare nodes active. So yeah, Scent of Death is what we're running here. We come through to the left and come up through the rare node to go to the glyph, which is still Territorial. I think this is the most debatable glyph that we have here. You could swap this for more damage if you need it, but I am running tier 100 often enough, so I like the damage reduction, and it gives another damage type. I activate this and get some extra dex around it in this way. Then we work our way down and around to actually finally pick up Scent of Death, and down to the left to pick up Ruin and all of the nodes around that. Then we come down to our next board, which is indeed Flesh Eater, which is giving us a massive damage increase when we consume 5 corpses, which we're doing automatically every second now, which is fantastic. So this buff will be triggered often enough without even thinking about it. So we come from the top down and around, picking up Stifle and the nodes around that, coming to the left and picking up Flesh Eater, then coming down and activating the glyph, which is still Control. Control provides massive improvements to damage to crowd control enemies, both in when they're CC'd and when you get more intelligence around the node. We want as much of that as possible, so we get 75 around this node, so very potent indeed. However, if you're doing single target, Control is not going to be as effective because there's a chance you'll kill the boss before it even staggers. If that's the case, it'd probably be worth it to run something like Corporeal for the 10% damage increase to physical damage, so that's an alternative pick there. But if you're doing mob clear open world content, the CC is going to be incredible, especially with our new ring that's, casting Corpse Tendrils more often, so things are stunned more often, so you get this perk more often. Anyway, this is how I get all that intelligence around the board, and also we pick up a little bit of resistance to all elements because of it, and we'll exit to the left, picking up color and the attack speed nodes around it. Then we come up to the left where we find our last board, which is still with it in my case. The reason for this is we're looking for a final board where we can get to a glyph socket quick and get some additional perks like some shadow resistance, which I was lacking on. But anyway, this is what I do. I come up to the left and go to the glyph socket where we have Sacrificial, of course. We don't need to level this up beyond activating the secondary effect, which is 40 intelligence to get a straight 10% damage increase, and it's a multiplier, so it's pretty incredible. This is how I get that active and also pick up the extra shadow resistance because of it, which is just what I needed. And that brings us to our new and updated gear section. From the top, we are still running Deathless Visage, providing a nice echo explosion as we shoot bone spears, making them deal more damage. On the chest piece, we have Might. I believe this is the most effective overall defensive aspect you can run. On the gloves, it's still Serration, increasing our damage based on how much essence we have above 50 at the time. We're still running Tobolt's Will, which is a massive damage increase, 40% times while unstoppable and for 4 seconds after. So every time you meta dash, you just get a huge damage improvement. But also, you get 50 of your primary resource, so 50 essence each time you do this dash every 4 seconds. That is incredible. So when I run my boots, I make sure that it's a plus maximum evade charge pair of boots. This means I'm able to meta dash 4 times instantly if I want to, maintain the unstoppable buff for both the damage increase and also generate that primary resource often. Of course, on our boots, we have the movement speed benefit, which is Ghost Walkers. Every time we dash when we're unstoppable using meta, we're also getting a speed increase, which is relevant when you consider Ravenous scales your attack speed based on your movement speed. We are still running a two-hand weapon with, of course, our most important aspect, the splintering aspect, making our bone spear generate vulnerable and just in general deal more damage. On the amulet, it's still Grasping Veins for the massive crit strike chance improvement and critical strike damage to those actually affected by the corpse tendrils. Even more potent with our new ring because it's going to be active even more. Our first ring is, of course, Exposed Flesh, the most important resource generator aspect in the build. Just having a high roll on this means you don't need any other resource generators. And since we're running Tobolt's Will with the extra essence regen that we have from that, this is just all we need. Lastly, the new ring, the Sacrilegious Soul, auto-triggering our corpse explosions and tendrils for us. This is the single target open world or speed clearing version. If you're going to do a tier 100, here's a swap that I would recommend. Take off Deathless and slot on a helmet. In my case, I'm going to swap my chest so that I have both Might and Disobedience. These provide the most defensive consistency that I'm able to find in just 2 defensive slots. In a tier 100 as Bone Spear, I don't need more damage, I need more survivability, and so this is how I achieve that. Then we have our gear affixes. On your gloves, you want ranks of Bone Spear, of course, and on your amulet, you're going to want ranks of Evulsion. Outside of that, it is crit strike chance, max essence, essence generation. These are your priorities, followed by crit damage and vulnerable damage. You can also find crit strike damage with bone skills specifically as another option. And on your weapon, you can also find core skill damage, which would also be really nice to have. For defensives, it's the same as always. Damage reduction, armor, max health, these are the most important ones. And then things like damage reduction from close and far, also very nice. Lastly, the gems, we have max health increases in our armor, we have the critical strike damage to vulnerable enemies up in the weapon, and in the jewelry, it's up to you. Check your stats and materials. What are you lacking on in resistances? Then slot what you need to get your resistance to max. The closer you are to 70% resistance in everything, the better. In my case, I needed poison resistance, fire resistance, and lightning resistance to achieve that. Now for the gameplay guide. Basically, are you playing single target for boss killing? Well, then you want to be in your max DPS setup. From there, we just decrepify the target and shoot off a basic attack for the crit strike chance and dash through the target to get Tobolt's Will procced and also curse the target with Vampiric Curse. Then we can Bone Storm and just begin spamming out Bone Spears at a medium range. The reason we want to be at a medium range is to speed up at the rate the bounce back of the splinters of the Bone Spear actually land. They actually do even more damage than the spear itself, so the faster those are hitting, the faster the target's also going to die. If you ever need to cast Corpse Tendrils to maintain that buff, then you can go for it, but your new ring should be triggering it for you often enough, as well as the corpse explosion buffs too. Just remember to meta dash regularly to maintain your Tobolt's Will, and also so it's regularly giving you that 50 essence to keep your DPS high. Pretty much anything and everything will be blown up by this combo as soon as you get set up and start blasting, and it feels amazing. On the other hand, with tier 100 pushes, you want to be in a more defensive setup, so that means running Might and Disobedience as I showed, but in gameplay it's much the same. Apply Decrepify to everything always, maintain your Tobolt's Will by dashing with meta often, and just smash things with Bone Spear. If you need to Bone Storm defensively, you can go for it, but I like to use it whenever there's elites or a big pack ahead of me, so they're instantly dying while I'm buffed up by that. Try to play at a medium to long range when possible to completely stop or reduce damage coming your way, because it dies before it can even reach you. And also make sure that Might itself is always active by sending out basic attacks often enough to maintain that damage reduction. Other than that, just blast everything with Bone Spears as usual. But there you have it. That's our updated Malignant ring version of Bone Spear. It feels incredible, so smooth. So I'm very glad we could fit this ring into the build without too much sacrifice. Like I said, technically we have slightly less damage because we've lost an offensive aspect, but it is well worth it. If you wanted, you could go one-hand weapon and offhand with a focus, and then you get that offensive aspect back, but I don't know if it's worth it. This is fantastic as it is. We'll be back for more builds in the future though, potentially updating old ones with a new ring in mind. But until then, I've been Hollow, you've been you. Thanks for watching, see you next time.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.